Hello everyone. Welcome to BYK Book Summary. I am Amin. Here we decode the inspiring journey, mental warfare, and empire building life lesson of the world's greatest legend. Today topics and their biggest secret are right on your screen. Let's dive in with my AI co-host.
If you spend like any amount of time online today, especially in those sort of business or entrepreneurial spaces, you are going to be bombarded with this very specific, really aggressive type of messaging.
Oh, yeah. The whole hustle culture thing.
Exactly. You know the exact type, the hustle culture gurus,
Yeah.
that whole alpha dog mentality. The idea that to build an empire, you basically have to be the loudest voice in the room.
Oh, you have to dominate.
You have to utterly dominate your competitors, yeah. And ruthlessly optimize every single second of your day just for maximum profit extraction. It's this weird binary expectation they push on you. You're either the predator or you're the prey.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
The prevailing narrative we get fed is that, empathy is somehow a weakness.
Yeah.
And that sheer volume and aggression is, I don't know, perfectly fine substitute for actual vision. We're totally conditioned to believe that astronomical success just naturally leaves this trail of collateral damage. And, well, that's just the accepted cost of doing business at a high level.
But what if I told you there's a completely different blueprint? A blueprint for empire building that is, honestly, vastly more successful, exponentially more enduring, and entirely based on the exact opposite of that chest-thumping ethos.
And that's what we're getting into today.
Yeah. Today, we're pulling from this brilliant biographical summary by BYK Book Summary, hosted by Amin, about a man who just completely shatters that modern alpha dog myth. We're going to dive into the life, the deeply personal struggles, and the profound legacy of Ratan Tata, who lived from 1937 to 2024.
An incredible figure.
Truly. And our mission for this deep dive is to really unpack his defining concept, which is quiet leadership.
Quiet leadership. It's such a great phrase.
It really is. We want to understand exactly how a background in architecture, a deeply ingrained personal empathy, and just an absolute non-negotiable commitment to character over profit allowed him to take this massive Indian conglomerate and transform it into a globally integrated yet fundamentally compassionate empire.
And that is exactly where we need to focus our analytical lens today, I think. Because what makes this story so incredibly compelling isn't just, a list of the companies he bought or the sheer scale of the wealth he generated.
Even though those numbers are absolutely staggering.
Oh, they are massive. But it's really how he built what he built. We're looking at an approach where humility isn't just like a nice moral garnish you slap onto a corporate social responsibility report, right?
Yeah, totally.
It's the actual core operational strategy. It's the engine of the entire enterprise. So we're looking at a masterclass in using emotional control, extreme patience, and profound observation as the ultimate levers of power.
Okay, let's unpack this from the very beginning, because this story, it doesn't start with a boardroom triumph or some golden parachute. It starts with, honestly, a portrait of intense isolation.
It really does.
So Ratan Neville Tata was born in December 1937 in Bombay, right into the Tata family, which is, arguably India's most celebrated industrial dynasty. Now, when you hear the word dynasty, you probably immediately think of endless privilege, right? Endless resources, absolute comfort.
A fairy tale upbringing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the reality of his early life abruptly pivots away from that fairy tale. In 1948, when he was just 10 years old, his parents separated, and he ended up being raised by his grandmother, Lady Navajbai Tata.
We really need to pause on the psychological weight of that moment because I think it's the crucible for literally everything that follows.
Yeah, 10 years old is so young for that.
Right. And think about the emotional landscape of a 10-year-old boy in 1948 India. Divorce was incredibly rare back then. And within the context of high society, dynastic families where public appearances are just paramount.
Oh yeah, the gossip must have been intense.
Exactly. It was practically unheard of.
Yeah.
So for a child in that specific environment, that separation wouldn't just be a private familial tragedy. It would be highly visible and highly scrutinized by everyone around them.
Right, so you're surrounded by unimaginable wealth. But emotionally, you are completely stranded on an island. And you can't just, throw money at that kind of profound loneliness.
No, you can't.
Yeah.
And the psychological framing here is critical. A profoundly lonely childhood gave him something that a perfectly comfortable one never could have, which is absolute self-reliance.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. When you're a child in a volatile emotional environment, like a high-profile parental separation where the adults are probably entirely consumed by their own conflict, you learn very quickly that reacting impulsively is dangerous.
Wow. Yeah, you just kind of shut down.
You retreat inwards. You learn to watch the adults around you, to read the room, to hold your tongue until you fully understand the underlying dynamics of the situation.
You're constantly observing.
Exactly. He was forced to learn how to remain emotionally controlled and, crucially, how to avoid making quick judgments. That childhood survival mechanism suspending immediate judgment that eventually became the absolute core of his leadership style decades later.
That is wild to think about.
I mean, he was literally forging the psychological tools of a global CEO at age 10 out of sheer emotional necessity.
That is such a profound way to look at it. The trauma, or at least that deep isolation, wasn't just something he passively survived. It was the manufacturing floor for his defining strength.
Perfectly said.
And we see the first major external manifestation of how his brain worked when we look at his education. So he goes to America, he attends Cornell University, but he doesn't study finance.
No, he doesn't.
He doesn't study corporate management or economics. He studies architecture. He later goes to Harvard Business School, sure, but that foundation in architecture, that feels so incredibly deliberate and telling to me.
It is entirely foundational. In fact, I'd argue that if we want to understand the mechanics of how he eventually managed the sprawling Tata Group, that architecture degree is the Rosetta Stone.
Okay, wait. How so? Connect those dots for me, because running a steel and automotive empire seems pretty far removed from, drafting floor plans.
Well, it comes down to systems thinking. What does an architect actually do? They don't just draw pretty pictures of building facades.
Right.
They study stress. They study load-bearing capacities. They study how wildly different, disparate materials like concrete, glass, steel, wood, how they have to interact seamlessly to prevent a massive structure from just collapsing under its own weight.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
Yeah, an architect looks at a chaotic, empty plot of land and visualizes a cohesive, structurally sound reality. They have to design from the deep foundation up, knowing that a single hidden flaw in that invisible base will eventually bring down the highest spire.
Wow.
So when you train your brain to think that way, you don't look at a company as just a spreadsheet of profits and losses.
You see it as a structure.
Exactly. You look at it as an interlocking human and industrial structure. You understand that if the foundation, meaning the workers, the raw materials, the community is compromised, the executive penthouse is eventually going to crash to the ground.
I love that. He's training his brain to think structurally, not just transactionally.
Exactly.
But then right after Cornell and Harvard, he hits this massive sliding doors moment, the quintessential fork in the road. He's in America, he has the elite Ivy League education, and he has a firm job offer on the table from IBM.
Which is huge.
Right. Now, we have to put ourselves in that specific era. IBM in the late 1950s and early 1960s, that is the absolute pinnacle of corporate prestige in America.
The frontier of modern technology at the time.
Yeah. He could have stayed in the U.S., lived a life of immense comfort, and built his own legacy entirely separate from that heavy, suffocating shadow of the Tata dynasty back in India.
It is the ultimate temptation for a young, ambitious person. Complete independence. A guaranteed path to success in the world's most robust economy. I mean, he could have been his own man, entirely self-made in the eyes of the corporate world.
Okay, let's unpack this, because his response to that IBM offer tells us everything we need to know about his internal compass. When his grandmother's health deteriorated, he returned to India.
He just gave it up.
He just walks away from IBM. He walks away from America. To me, this is like a classic hero's refusal of the call narrative, but entirely inverted.
Oh, that's an interesting way to phrase it.
Yeah, because usually the hero refuses the call to adventure to stay home where it's safe. Here, he's refusing the call of individualistic capitalist glory to answer the heavy, complicated call of familial duty.
Right.
Giving up a coveted job like IBM to go back and care for the grandmother who raised him when his parents split. I mean, it's a massive, tangible sacrifice.
It is. And I think it raises an incredibly important question about our modern definition of ambition.
How do you mean?
Well, think about this in today's context. If a young hotshot today turned down an early engineering offer at, say, Apple or Google to go back to their hometown to care for a sick grandparent, modern hustle culture would call them foolish.
Oh, they totally would. They'd say, you're throwing your life away.
Exactly. The alpha dog gurus would say, You're sacrificing your trajectory. You're letting emotion cloud your business judgment.
Right, protect your grind or whatever.
Right. But his act of returning wasn't a sacrifice of his ambition at all. It was a clarification of his character.
Yeah.
His return to India wasn't a retreat. It was an absolute alignment with his core values.
Wow.
It proved incredibly early on that his hierarchy of values prioritized people, specifically the people who cared for him, over prestigious corporate logos.
Yeah.
He simply couldn't be a leader who abandons his foundational relationships just for a paycheck.
Exactly. And so he returns to India. And, you know, if you are following the standard script of dynastic wealth, you might logically expect that the scion of India's most celebrated industrial family, arriving fresh from Cornell architecture and a Harvard business school, is going to immediately take an elevator straight to the top floor.
You expect the red carpet?
You expect the corner office. You expect him to be handed a massive division to run just because of his last name. But he completely subverts that expectation. He joins the Tata Group in 1962, but he receives absolutely zero preferential treatment.
None whatsoever.
Yeah.
Which is genuinely shocking for a family business of that scale.
Yeah. Instead of the corner office, he goes to the exact opposite place. He is assigned to work on the shop floor at Tata Steel. And he isn't just like walking around with a clipboard inspecting things in a clean suit.
No.
He is physically out there shoveling limestone and operating the blast furnaces alongside the regular daily wage laborers.
Yeah.
He is doing the grueling, incredibly dangerous, physically exhausting manual labor of industrial steel production.
And this is where that architectural mindset we discussed really locks into place in a practical sense. He chose to start from the ground floor because he held a deep conviction that real leadership requires a genuine ground-level understanding of the work.
Right, back to the foundation.
Exactly. Going back to our architecture analogy,
Yeah.
you cannot possibly design a skyscraper that will stand the test of time if you do not intimately understand the physical properties of the concrete and the steel that will support it.
You have to know the materials.
You have to know how the materials behave under extreme heat and pressure.
Mm-hmm.
By physically shoveling limestone, he was learning the literal physical reality of his family's empire.
Now, you hear stories like this, though, and sometimes, I mean, I have to play devil's advocate here.
Sure.
I read this, and initially I think, is this just a PR stunt? You know, the classic undercover boss routine where the CEO puts on a hard hat, pretends to be a normal guy for a weekend, takes a few strategically lit photos for the annual report, and then goes right back to the air-conditioned country club.
Oh, absolutely.
It just feels almost too perfect, you know?
It's a totally fair skepticism,
Right.
especially given how performative modern corporate culture is.
Mm-hmm.
But the timeline completely dismantles that idea.
How so?
This was 1962. He doesn't become the group chairman until 1991.
Oh, wow. Okay.
That is almost 3 full decades later. There was no PR machine spinning this into a viral LinkedIn post. There were no cameras. This wasn't a weekend retreat. It was a sustained, authentic integration into the foundational dirt, heat, and danger of the business. It was a rigorous, intentional insulation against the ivory tower syndrome.
The ivory tower syndrome, that is such a killer of legacy companies, isn't it?
It's fatal.
When the second or third generation inherits the wealth, but they are so utterly disconnected from the actual production of that wealth that they make decisions based entirely on spreadsheets. They become completely blind to the human reality on the factory floor.
Precisely. The ivory tower breed of leader looks at a sprawling steel plant and sees nothing but operating expenses, yield percentages, and profit margins.
Just numbers.
Just numbers. But Ratan Tata, because he stood right next to the furnaces in 1962, looked at a steel plant and saw the men sweating. He understood the physical toll of the labor. He knew the actual agonizing human effort required to produce a single ton of steel.
That's powerful.
That ground-level empathy is absolutely impossible to fake, and it's impossible to learn in a classroom at Harvard Business School.
Yeah.
You have to literally feel the heat of the furnace on your own skin.
And what's truly amazing is how this empathy, this literal structural understanding of the company from the dirt up, becomes his primary strategic weapon decades later.
Yes.
Fast forward to 1991. J.R.D. Tata, the legendary patriarch of the company, finally steps down and nominates Ratan Tata as the group chairman. He's 53 years old.
A long apprenticeship.
Right. He finally takes the helm. But it is not a smooth, celebratory coronation. The resistance he faced from inside the company was immediate and fierce.
And this is perhaps the most critical test of his entire concept of quiet leadership. When he took over in 1991, he was faced with several senior Tata leaders. Men who had served the company for decades, who were fiercely unwilling to accept his authority.
They didn't want him there.
Not at all. We are talking about men who vastly outranked him in practical executive experience. Men who had been running their own divisions like personal autonomous fiefdoms for years.
Right, the Tata Group at that time wasn't a tight, modern corporation. It was described in the source as a federation of loosely connected companies.
Which is really just a polite corporate way of saying it was a chaotic mess.
Exactly, a mess of powerful warlords doing whatever you wanted, hoarding capital, and totally ignoring the central holding company. And now this 53-year-old architect, who they probably still dismissively viewed as the kid who used to shovel limestone.
By the nephew or whatever.
Yeah, suddenly he is their boss. And there was a massive internal corporate rebellion resulting in high-profile departures.
Now, I want you to think about how a typical corporate raider or an aggressive alpha dog 1990s CEO would handle a rebellion of that magnitude.
Oh, they fire everyone.
The standard aggressive playbook is to immediately clean house. You fire the dissenters loudly and publicly. You aggressively assert your dominance to terrify everyone else into line.
You make an example out of them.
Exactly. You leak damaging stories to the business press about their incompetence to protect your own image. You basically go to total war.
Right, you show them who the alpha is, you mark your territory.
Exactly. But what was Ratan Tata's response? Methodical silence.
Wow.
His response was patience, not confrontation. He set about restructuring the group quietly. He never fought them publicly. He never named anyone in the media. He flat out refused to roll in the mud.
That takes so much restraint.
It is the absolute manifestation of the emotional control he learned as a deeply isolated 10-year-old boy. When faced with aggressive, highly public resistance from deeply entrenched leaders, he didn't react with ego. He reacted with architectural precision.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. How do you actually do that, like, logistically?
It's tricky.
How do you rein in a bunch of corporate warlords without firing them loudly? To me, it's like he was tasked with renovating a massive, historic, sprawling mansion. But the problem is, the grumpy, older tenants are still living inside the mansion.
That's a great way to picture it.
Right. And they are constantly complaining about the noise, and they are flat out refusing to let him change the wallpaper. A lesser leader, a louder leader, would just bring in the wrecking balls, evict everyone, tear the house down, and build a shiny, soulless new glass box.
That is a perfect analogy, because he didn't burn the house down. He used that structural mindset. He knew exactly which load-bearing walls he needed to carefully move and which ones he had to leave alone for the time being so the roof didn't just collapse on everyone's heads.
But practically speaking, what does that look like in a boardroom?
Practically, it means he starved the rebellion of oxygen by simply refusing to engage in public warfare. He centralized the financial controls. He instituted standardized retirement ages.
Oh, that's clever.
Very. It naturally aged out some of the most entrenched resistance over time without a messy public firing.
Wow. He just waited them out.
He weighed them out. He unified the brand identity so the individual fiefdoms couldn't operate as independent empires anymore. He just quietly, deliberately redrew the blueprints and redirected the flow of capital until the structure worked better.
That is brilliant.
He focused entirely on integrating the enterprise, knowing that once the foundation was solid, the dissenting voices would either adapt to the new reality or leave of their own accord. The discipline required to not strike back when you are being publicly undermined by your own senior staff. It's immense.
And that silent victory internally, that patient architectural renovation of the business, is what finally sets the stage for the absolute explosion of global ambition that follows.
Yes, the expansion phase.
Because once that internal foundation is integrated and truly strong, Tata finally looks outward. And when he does, he absolutely shocks the entire Western business establishment.
He stunned the world. The list of acquisitions is staggering.
Go through them, because it's wild.
Okay, so in 2000, they acquire Tetley Tea, which is one of Britain's most iconic and historic brands.
Yeah.
In 2004, they acquired Daewoo Trucks. In 2007, they pull off a massive $12 billion acquisition of Chorus Steel, a European giant.
12 billion.
12 billion. And then, in 2008, the absolute crown jewel of this era of expansion, acquiring Jaguar Land Rover from Ford for $2.3 billion.
It is breathtaking. How does a quote-unquote quiet leader pull off a $12 billion steel acquisition? You look at that list of companies and there is an incredible historical poetry to it, isn't there?
Oh, the irony is thick.
Right. An Indian conglomerate representing the legacy of a formerly colonized nation, systematically buying up the absolute most iconic historic British brands, Tetley Tea, Jaguar Land Rover. It's a stunning historical reversal.
It really is.
But there is a very specific anecdote regarding the Jaguar Land Rover acquisition from Ford that I think perfectly encapsulates his style.
Yes. What's fascinating here is the sheer arrogance he was up against. At the time of the JLR acquisition in 2008, Ford executives reportedly told Tata that they were doing him a favor by selling it to him.
The absolute arrogance of that statement. We are doing you a favor. As he hands them a check for over $2 billion.
It is staggering.
Yeah.
It is the absolute epitome of Western corporate hubris. I mean, Ford was struggling massively at the time. JLR was viewed internally at Ford as a massive, bleeding burden that they just couldn't figure out how to run profitably.
Yeah, they wanted to offload it.
And yet, sitting across the negotiating table, they still felt the desperate need to patronize the buyer. Now, I want you to imagine how a reactive, ego-driven CEO would respond to being told they're being done a favor during a multi-billion-dollar acquisition.
Oh, they would blow up the deal immediately.
Right.
They would take deep personal offense. They'd yell across the table. They'd leverage the media to insult Ford's management, and they'd let their bruised pride dictate their entire corporate strategy. They'd probably walk away just to prove a point about respect.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But Tata doesn't do that because, as we discussed with his childhood, he learned to suspend immediate judgment and maintain complete emotional control.
He just lets it slide.
He decouples his ego from the negotiation. He doesn't care about the insult. He cares entirely about the asset.
He absorbs the arrogance without a word, signs the paperwork, and takes the company because he sees something they don't.
Precisely. If we connect this back to his earliest traits, this is the ultimate application of avoiding quick judgments. The Ford executives looked at JLR and saw a failure. Ratan Tata looked at JLR and saw a massive hidden value.
The architectural mindset again.
Yes, he saw an automotive brand with incredible heritage and engineering pedigree that just needed the right architectural restructuring and the right long-term patience to be revived. He understood that Ford was failing JLR, not the other way around.
And the historical punchline to that moment is flawless. Today, Jaguar Land Rover is among the most profitable businesses in the entire Tata portfolio.
It's incredible.
An asset that was presented to him as a burden became one of his group's greatest strengths. It is the ultimate quiet revenge. He didn't argue with Ford in the boardroom in 2008. He just let the profit margins a decade later do all the talking.
I love that. Let the margins talk.
It completely redefines the concept. It proves that quiet does not mean timid. It means executing massive, highly aggressive, visionary leaps with total and complete emotional discipline.
It is a profound lesson in the mechanics of power, really. The person who feels the need to puff their chest out and claim they're doing you a favor is almost always the person losing the negotiation.
Totally.
Tata's silence was his ultimate strength. He knew the structural value of what he was acquiring vastly better than the people who were desperately trying to sell it.
But as incredible as those multi-billion-dollar acquisitions are, and they are legendary in the business world, his ambitions weren't ultimately about just buying up luxury Western brands or dominating the global steel market.
No, there was another side to him.
Right. His most passionate project, the one that I think reveals the absolute core of his character, had nothing to do with global dominance. It was aimed squarely at the poorest citizens of his own country.
You're talking about the Tata Nano. And this is a fascinating case study in the deep tension between pure, ruthless capitalism and what we might call empathetic engineering. The entire project is rooted in a single, highly observant moment.
Right. So the story goes, he's driving and he sees a family of four, a father driving, a mother holding a baby, and a toddler squeezed between them all, crammed onto a single motorized scooter in the pouring rain.
Which is a very common sight in India, unfortunately.
Exactly. And his immediate thought wasn't a business thought. It wasn't, how can I sell these people a scooter? It was a deeply human thought. He asked himself, why cannot every Indian family have a safe, affordable car?
This completely breaks the mold of traditional product development. Normally, a CEO or a corporate marketing department identifies an untapped demographic. They run a massive profitability analysis, and then they design a product specifically to extract maximum margin from that demographic.
They just want the cash grab.
Right. But Tata didn't look at that family on the scooter and see a market to exploit. He looked at them and saw a severe, life-threatening safety hazard. He saw a profound societal inequity. And he realized that, as the head of the Tata Group, he possessed the immense engineering power and capital to fix it.
So what does this all mean in practice? What did that empathy actually build? It resulted in the creation of the Tata Nano, and the mandate was insane.
The price point was unbelievable.
It was famously priced at just 1 lakh rupees. In US dollars, depending on the exchange rate at the time, that is roughly around $1,000 to $1,500.
For a brand new car.
For a new car. The engineering goal was to make a four-wheeled enclosed car as affordable as a high-end motorcycle. But we have to be honest about the outcome here. The Nano faced immense commercial challenges, production issues, and marketing missteps, and ultimately, it did not achieve the mass market adoption he dreamed of.
And this is where the analysis of his leadership style becomes deeply nuanced. Because in the strict, unforgiving ledger of Wall Street capitalism, the Tata Nano was a commercial struggle.
Right.
It did not hit the massive sales targets. It didn't revolutionize transportation in the way it was hypothesized. But we cannot judge the Nano solely by its financial figures. In pure capitalist terms, it struggled. But as an indicator of corporate character, it was a masterpiece.
Okay, wait, hold on. Let me push back on this a little bit.
Sure.
If it was a commercial failure, how was that a triumph? Like, Wall Street would have his head for pouring millions in R&D into a car that didn't sell well. How do we justify celebrating a flop?
Because of the intent and the paradigm shift it represented. The dream itself was genuine. Think about the why behind the car. The genuine intention proves that profit was not his primary motivation. People were.
Okay.
It tells you more about Ratan Tata's character than any financial figure could. He was willing to risk capital on a project with razor-thin, almost non-existent margins, simply because it was the right thing to do for his countrymen. It shifts the corporate paradigm from merely extracting margin to attempting a moonshot to solve a societal hazard.
Okay, I see what you were saying. I think about it like a brilliant medical breakthrough, say. A researcher invents a revolutionary device that could save thousands of lives. But the manufacturing process turns out to be just slightly too complex to scale up cheaply, so it never reaches every rural hospital.
That's a great comparison.
You don't call the inventor a failure. You recognize the profound humanity and brilliance in the attempt. The Nano didn't conquer the market, but the very fact that a multi-billion-dollar global conglomerate poured its heart, its R&D, and its resources into building a car that prioritized the safety of a poor family on a scooter over maximizing shareholder returns. That proves their ultimate priority.
Exactly.
It asks you, the listener, a really tough question. When was the last time we saw a global CEO launch a massive flagship physical product entirely out of empathy?
It is incredibly rare,
Right.
almost non-existent at that scale. And it demonstrates that for Ratan Tata, the corporation was a tool for societal problem-solving first, and a wealth-generating mechanism second. The failure of the Nano to achieve mass adoption doesn't invalidate the empathy that drove its creation. It cements it.
And this idea that profit is secondary to people. It isn't just a nice, heartwarming anecdote about a tiny car. It isn't just PR spin. This empathy is literally, legally, and structurally hardwired into the very framework of the entire Tata empire.
This is the part that is truly unique.
And this is the part of the deep dive that absolutely blew my mind when I first read it.
We are talking about the Tata Trust model. It is perhaps the most significant structural anomaly in the world of global megabusiness. 66% of Tata Sons is owned by Tata Trusts, which are charitable organizations.
Let that number sink in for a second. 66%, 2/3. We are not talking about a billionaire who makes a ruthless fortune, retires, and then sets up a foundation on the side to donate 5% of his net worth for a tax write-off and some good PR.
Yeah, the usual billionaire philanthropy model.
Exactly. We are talking about the fact that 66% of the holding company of one of India's largest conglomerates, a conglomerate that owns Jaguar Land Rover, massive steel operations, global IT services, tea companies, hotels, is literally owned by charity.
Exactly. How does this practically work? It fundamentally redefines the mechanics of a corporation. It means that when this massive industrial machine generates profits, a huge portion of those dividends doesn't go to enriching a few family members or external shareholders.
Wow.
Those profits flow directly back into the trusts, and those trusts pour that capital directly into education, healthcare, clean water initiatives, and rural development across India.
That is just incredible.
The wealth is structurally, legally bound to the welfare of the people. This goes right back to our discussion of his architectural mindset. He didn't just build a profitable company. He built a mechanism where the load-bearing pillars of the enterprise rest entirely on philanthropic foundations. It is institutionalized empathy.
It is like building the world's most efficient money printing machine, but you fundamentally hardwire it so that 2/3 of the cash it prints automatically flies out the window and lands directly in underfunded schools and rural hospitals.
That's a very vivid way to put it.
It is staggering, but as structurally massive as that is, his empathy was also deeply, quietly personal. And we see this during one of the most painful historical moments in modern Indian history, the 2008 Mumbai terrorist attacks.
The attacks that tragically devastated the Taj Mahal Palace Hotel, which is a crown jewel property of the Tata Group. The way Ratan Tata responded to that crisis is the ultimate distillation of his character. In the aftermath of the siege, he personally visited the family of every single affected employee.
And the most crucial detail here, he did it with no cameras, no press releases, no media entourage, just his presence and his support.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, doing this without cameras is the ultimate proof that his empathy was intrinsic. It wasn't about crisis management.
It wasn't a photo op.
Exactly. It wasn't a marketing strategy to save the brand's image. In an era where every single thing a CEO does is focus grouped, filmed, and blasted out on social media to build their personal brand, the idea of the head of a massive empire quietly walking into the homes of his grieving employees, sitting with them in their living rooms without a single photographer.
It's unheard of.
It proves he felt a profound personal, paternal responsibility for the people who worked in his buildings.
It brings the entire narrative full circle. The lonely 10-year-old boy who was isolated by his parents' separation, who had to learn self-reliance and emotional control to survive his childhood. He eventually grows up to become this deeply paternal, comforting, steadfast presence for an entire nation in its darkest hour.
Yes.
He became the reliable presence for thousands of families that he perhaps wished he had more of when he was young.
It is a beautiful, deeply poignant symmetry. And it perfectly synthesizes the core lesson of his life. Ratan Tata's life definitively proves that wealth and character are not mutually exclusive. In fact, it argues that character is the only thing that makes wealth truly meaningful.
It refutes the alpha dog myth completely. You don't have to be ruthless to be rich. You don't have to be loud to be powerful. Humility isn't a weakness. It is a multiplier for power.
That is the paradox of his quiet leadership. By refusing to demand the spotlight, by refusing to engage in petty, loud corporate warfare, by refusing to put pure profit above the dignity of people, he actually accrued vastly more respect, more authority, and ultimately more lasting global power than any of his louder, more aggressive contemporaries.
So true.
Leadership isn't just about the structures you build, but how you build them, and who you bring along with you on the journey.
How you build it and who you bring along. He built it with an architect's extreme patience, starting literally from the dirt and heat of the shop floor. And he brought the entire nation of India along with him through the structural, hardwired philanthropy of the Tata Trusts. It is an incredible journey.
A truly historic life.
From a childhood marked by separation and isolation, to shoveling limestone, to quietly maneuvering through massive corporate rebellions, to executing multi-billion-dollar global acquisitions with total emotional control, and finally hardwiring his entire empire to give back to the society that supported it.
It forces a complete reevaluation of what we admire in leadership. And I think it leaves us with a profound question to consider long after this deep dive ends.
What's that?
Well, think about your own workplace, your own community, or even the media you consume daily. We are relentlessly conditioned to follow the loudest voice in the room. We equate aggression with competence and volume with vision. But if this story shows us that the greatest, most enduring, most globally respected empires are actually built through quiet observation, extreme patience, and a willingness to shovel limestone alongside the workers, what kind of immense power are you ignoring right now simply because it doesn't shout?
Wow, what an incredible question to leave on. Are we missing the true leaders in our lives, or failing to cultivate that leadership within ourselves because we are too distracted by the noise? That is something to truly mull over. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the life of Ratan Tata, a man who proved that character truly does build the greatest empires. Keep questioning the narratives you are handed, and keep seeking out the stories that challenge your assumptions about how the world actually works. We will see you next time.
So friends, that was the complete breakdown. Make sure to take a screenshot of this growth gift, this infographic, so this lesson stay with you. If you want to learn from legends every single day. Join our community. I am Amin. Always remember, read more, think deeper. Let me know in the comments who we should cover next. See you in next episode.